This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 873 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. Thanks for tuning in. I do this show every year with my friend Jim Sannes. Sannes, who's a managing editor of digital media at FanDuel Research, he puts together a great article on statistically superior quarterbacks every draft season. And he's come away with a lot of hits through the years. So on today's episode, I ask him about that article, about that study, and I ask him questions about this year's draft class. I know that late round perspectives is a thing now, and you're probably wondering why this isn't just a perspectives episode. And that's a valid question. Perspectives is a show that covers a wide variety of topics, and I might get lost in conversation with the guest a bit. This episode is to the point. It's one overarching topic, and it's in the standard late round podcast format. No fluff and to the point. Over the next 3 weeks, you'll be hearing from other analysts who cover the NFL draft, and I'll be doing an episode on running backs and wide receivers to go along with this one. It's something I've done each year on the show to give you guys something a little different as opposed to just hearing my takes and my takes only on these players. Now, before I get into the interview with Jim, don't forget to check out Underdog Fantasy. I've been drafting over there over the last month or so. It's giving me a nice early prep on the fantasy football season. I've got tons of slow best ball drafts going on at all times where I've got an 8-hour clock with each pick. Now, if you haven't played best ball before, the idea is simple. You draft a fantasy football team and you can do it in minutes. There's no waivers, there's no trades, there's no lineup setting. Your team is optimized for you in season based on how players perform. Drafts are happening right now over there, and you can use the information that I share on here or in my prospect guide or any future information because I am going to do more best ball content. You can use that info to help you draft. If you're new to Underdog and you want to check it out, make sure you use promo code LATEROUND when you sign up. If you do that, you'll get a deposit match up to $100. Again, that's promo code LATEROUND. Head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the Underdog Fantasy app to sign up. Now let's talk to Jim about this year's quarterback class. So Jim, we do this episode every year, but for anyone who hasn't listened to this episode in the past, you do a study where you analyze that particular year's draft class to find which quarterbacks are statistically superior. Can you sort of talk through that study and the things that you're looking for?
Yes, I think the key word there is statistical. It does not include the sentiment of scouts. And that matters, but I'm not a scout. And so I know that I'm not going to be able to build a model that can be like that. But I think that the model I use, which looks at just players' collegiate efficiency, their age, and their experience level, it does test pretty well. And it can do a pretty good job of identifying a risk level. It's not going to say this guy's a bust. It's not going to say this guy's a definite hit, but it can identify risk level in players beyond just draft capital. It's hard to check all the boxes of getting players who are young, efficient, and experienced because it's hard to, be both young and experienced unless you're starting as a true freshman and declare early and stuff like that. But the closer you get to checking those boxes, the more likely you are to succeed. And again, opinions of scouts matter because they're good at what they do, but I want to focus on what I'm good at. And just from a true numbers perspective, you can get a lot of useful information by looking at this. So if you look at since 2010, there have been 43 quarterbacks who have been first round picks. And of those 43, 14 have ranked inside the top 10 of number fires, total net expected points in 1/3 of their qualified season. So total NEP looks at expected points added throughout the year, including what you do as a rusher. And if you're in the top 10 in 1/3 of your qualified seasons, that's what I would call a quality first-round pick as a quarterback. So you're looking at guys like Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, now CJ Stroud too. And that's kind of what you're looking for here. So if you look at those 14 guys, on average, they've ranked in the 82nd percentile of my pre-draft model. And again, that does not include draft capital at all. That is just based on their college resume. The less successful first-round picks are in the 69th percentile. So 82nd for the successes, 69th for the less successful guys. So you do get a decent gap between the successful first-round picks and the less successful guys based on just looking at their collegiate resumes. There are some obvious misses, like the model did not like, shockingly, Josh Allen or Jordan Love. But they're the only guys in the successful bucket who rank below the 80th percentile in the pre-draft model. So, there will be misses, but for the most part, you tend to see a higher hit rate out of guys with better rankings in the model. There are guys on the opposing side too, like Baker Mayfield, Marcus Mariota. My model loved them. They didn't pan out. But even just the numbers can give you at least a good idea of the risk level of players who do wind up being first-round pick.
Let's talk about that model a little bit and how it relates to this 2024 class. Spoiler alert to anyone who has not checked out your article and read about it, but pre-draft, again, we have to be very clear that this is not with draft capital embedded or anything like that, but pre-draft, Jayden Daniels is the QB1 in this class according to your numbers. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily ranking him that way,
right?
But what makes his profile sort of stand out that much? Because I was kind of shocked to see him as the quintessential QB1, because I know that age is a factor in what you're looking at, and he's been in college for a decent amount of time. So tell me what the model and the numbers really liked about Jayden Daniels.
Yeah, it surprised me too, because of the age factor. I know how important that is for the model, so I was pretty surprised when that happened. But there are a couple key points that pushed Daniels up. The first one is that he was a psychopath in terms of efficiency this year. He had a 95.7 total QBR. He was one of only 2 players in the entire nation who were above 90. And that number adjusts for schedule. It adjusts for sacks. Like, you hear a lot about the pressure to sack rate for Jayden Daniels. And that number specifically is high, but he doesn't take a ton of sacks overall as a player, because he can get out of sacks with his legs and stuff like that. He also averaged 13.6 adjusted yards per attempt. That tied the all-time record. And that number does not account for his rushing. So just passing, this dude was insanely efficient. So that's the big thing, is the efficiency. He obviously emphatically checks that box. The second thing is that he compensates for being older by being very experienced. He said we've known about him for a while. It's because he started as a true freshman. He had 55 games of 10-plus pass attempts. And that's the cutoff that I use to the model. Because, there are some guys who will, like J.J. McCarthy is a true freshman. He would kind of spell Cade McNamara, and, they would use both those guys. You don't want to count that the exact same as a guy who is, the true starter for his team. So if a guy were older and less experienced, like a Mitchell Trubisky, Carson Wentz, it'd mean that they were not good enough to get on the field right away, and that'd be a red flag. But Daniels was a 4-star recruit, played his entire career, and I think that does help him here for sure. And the third thing is that he's not as old as perception, even though he was a 5-year starter in college. If you're looking at him relative to guys in this class, he's only 10 months older than Caleb Williams, who was a 3rd-year declare. So he's a true junior. Daniel's a 5th-year senior, but there's actually less than a year between those guys in terms of their age. He's also 0.6 years younger than Michael Penix. He is 0.8 years younger than Bo Nix, even though I think he and Bo Nix are in the same class. So yes, he is old, and that is a downside for Daniels, but he's so experienced and so efficient that he overcomes that in the model. He's actually the top-ranked model in the my model is looked at for any quarterback invited to the combine since 2010. So the model does love him. I do think there are good counterpoints to him. People whose opinions I respect a lot are concerned about Daniels. He's a bit light. Things like that. Maybe not the best anticipatory thrower. He does run a bit too much when pressured. He does get sacked when pressured. Played with an awesome supporting cast, as you know, looking at the wide receiver numbers. But he put up historic numbers with that cast, even before you account for the rushing. So I'm really glad, personally, the NFL seems to like Daniels a lot. Yeah,
I think there's often times where we almost double count the good supporting cast thing, where, like Daniels did what he had to do with the weapons that he had. We can't necessarily discount that. I mean, we can give it context, of course, but we can't just totally discount something like that. Let me ask you, because you brought up the pressure to sack thing.
Yeah.
Is that something, I mean, I don't know if you've even dug into it or not, so you don't have to. Yeah. Okay. So is that something that you're overly concerned about, or is this, do you think that this is something of, sort of an arbitrary cutoff thing that people are posting out there on Twitter and such and saying, look at this group of quarterbacks who were bad in pressure to sack, and then look at this group of quarterbacks who were good within the metric, and it just being kind of arbitrary? Or do you think that there is something there and that we should be somewhat concerned?
I think it's a concern. It's a red flag for sure, but that does not mean you totally write the person off, because like, let's say you just look at first round picks and their pressure to sack rates since 2010. The highest one is Justin Fields. And like that, he didn't pan out. Marcus Mariota's up there. Baker Mayfield is up there. Guys my model whiffed on have had high pressure to sack numbers. So like that's something to keep in mind for sure. But then get a bit lower, you get to Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert has the 5th highest pressure to sack rate in his final year of any first round pick since 2010. Joe Burrow is 2 spots below him. Then it's Lamar Jackson. Then it's Josh Allen. Like these are very successful players. And now their numbers were not as high as Jayden Daniels was, but they had a higher than average pressure to sack rates in their final years in college. Final year, you want to look at their entire career to expand the sample and stuff like that. But I looked at it, and if you go back to like the successful first round picks versus less successful ones, it was about the same. Their pressure to sack rate in college. So I looked into it because I think it's a valuable stat. It does correlate well to NFL numbers, and that's why smart people bring this number up. But when you look at total QBR, it does account for overall sacks. Like it accounts for the expected points lost on sacks. I think that I was comfortable with excluding it from the model. And I did look into it because I thought it was good analysis people were doing. But when I dug into it, I didn't see enough to make it a thing that I wanted to factor in individually versus like keeping it be a contextual stat. Like I look at numbers versus top 50 defenses by SP+. I look at numbers on 3rd and 6 or longer, like obvious passing situations. I look at those numbers, but they're not specifically in the model. I think that for me, pressure to sack rate will be something that's similar where I look at it, but it's not specifically independently in the model.
Any concerns with Jayden Daniels being a Justin Fields type and kind of going down that path?
Totally. I think that like there's always that risk for sure. And that's why you want to factor in what the scouts say, because like they're good at what they do as well. But his issues that he had, those were present in college as well. And like my model had Justin Fields a bit lower. He was 90th percentile in the pre-draft model. So like, a good prospect. But like not like amazing or anything like that. So there were some concerns there too. So personally, I'm okay with him. I'm glad the NFL buys in because, like, if he were to, like, let's say worst case scenario he falls during the draft, then I'm okay upping those concerns. For me, it's more so just like a red flag and a thing to consider, but it's not a situation where I jump ship on him just as a result of the pressure to sack numbers.
Yeah, and from a fantasy perspective, I mentioned this on the quarterback episode that I did last week on quarterbacks that appreciate and how they appreciate in value. Justin Fields from year 1 to year 2 dropped only 9 spots in startup ADP, despite having a pretty horrific passing season year 1 and really not being the Justin Fields that, even from a fantasy perspective, that we saw, after that. So yeah, I mean, I think that at the very least, this is making me feel pretty comfortable in investing in Jayden Daniels because we know the upside could be really immense in fantasy. Yeah. And then along with that, we know that there's sort of this like embedded floor from a value perspective. Right. But then also you're saying all these nice things about him as a quarterback itself and him being basically the best quarterback that the model pre-draft has seen. That's all very, very good news. The other quarterback in this class that's getting more steamed and more hype than Jayden Daniels is Caleb Williams. He has extremely unbelievable odds right now to go first overall. Sounds like it's a lock that it's going to happen unless something crazy happens off the field, I would assume. So Caleb Williams going first overall to the Bears, obviously a great landing spot, but that's not something that we're, analyzing here per se. Is it warranted that he would be the first overall pick? Some people are talking about him being generational. Now, I don't think this is the same, from a perception standpoint, the same thing or situation that even people felt about even maybe a Trevor Lawrence. Like I feel like people were maybe a little bit more bullish, like everyone consensus wise being more bullish on a guy like T-Law. And then, Andrew Luck was like a different, on a different level in terms of everyone just really being into him. There are haters out there. There are Caleb Williams haters. I know that some of it is the way that he handles himself, but also, there's people like Merrill Hodge who come out there and say that he has a lot of flaws to his actual game at quarterback. Is the model seeing something similar?
Not to that extent. It doesn't view him as being like a generational quarterback, but it does view him as being like well worth the first overall pick. And like if I were the Bears, I would do it. Like I'm happily taking Caleb Williams first overall if I get that option. He ranks 88th percentile by the model, again looking at just his numbers. And since 2010, there have been 10 quarterbacks who have gone first overall, and the average ranking for those guys in the pre-draft model was 90th percentile. So Williams is right there. He has 35 games with 10 plus pass attempts, which is a very good number for his age. He had a total QBR in the 80s in 3 separate seasons, which is just like really, really fun. It's only 3 seasons in college, a total QBR of 80 or higher all 3 seasons. That's really, really good. And he put up good efficiency numbers despite playing with like high school level defense. Just like he's playing in negative game scripts the entire time. Almost half his pass attempts came while trailing last year. This guy had to be Superman. And like he did step up a decent number of times in doing exactly that. So he looks good by the numbers overall. And he looks better when you consider the context of he had to be the entire team for USC this year. And that's why I'm higher on him than the model. But again, the model does like him too. Going back to the successful first-round picks, on average, they were in the 81st percentile of the model, and Williams is in the 88th. So he's well above that. And a lot of the guys in his range of the model have been superstars. Patrick Mahomes, also 88th percentile. You hear that comp of like, he's Mahomes, because like they play kind of similarly, and like they're almost the exact same in the model. So like, he's not Mahomes because no one is Mahomes, but like they're pretty similar. Joe Burrow in 92nd percentile, Lamar Jackson 91st. So he's in really good company. And when you watch him, you understand why he gets this buzz. So the model likes him a lot. I like him a lot. I think that matters. You mentioned Lawrence. Lawrence was 94th percentile by my model in the pre-draft process, so a bit higher. He was younger than Williams. And good efficiency numbers too. You mentioned Luck. He actually was above Luck because Luck didn't have like the best efficiency numbers. He was about the same age as Andrew Luck, 87th percentile for Luck. So if you're looking at like the quote unquote like generational guys, he grades out right between Luck and Lawrence from a numbers perspective. But either way you slice it, he is deserving of being the first overall pick in this draft.
Do you think there's any chance that in a super flex rookie draft you would consider taking Jayden Daniels because of the rushing upside, the mobility, over Caleb Williams?
I would consider it for sure. I think you kind of have to, given the rushing, just because like that's so valuable from a floor perspective. And like if you're talking about ceiling for fantasy, you want both the rushing but also the passing. And like there is a very legitimate outcome where Jayden Daniels gives that too. So if I were drafting like right now, like before the draft, I would go Williams first overall, 101 for Superflex, because the draft capital with him is much more firm and I love what he does. So I would take him 1.01. But let's say, like most rookie drafts, we're drafting after the draft and Daniels goes second overall to Washington and my rookie draft is after that. I'm going to take Daniels if he goes second overall in the draft because they have a good supporting cast there. The scrambling stuff I talked about before is actually a feature in fantasy rather than being a bug. He ran for 1,134 yards last year before you add back in the numbers, the yardage lost due to sacks, and 10 touchdowns. So like he's Randall Cunningham, and in fantasy, I think that's pretty tough to turn down. So if the draft plays out the way it's currently projected to, I would take Daniels 101, but I'm not going to push back on anybody who wants to go Williams because like, again, the scouting sentiment is very high at him. The model does like him. But personally, I go Daniels 101, Williams 102, and I take both those guys well above the wide receivers for Superflex Dynasty.
Nice. I love. So what if Daniels went to New England at 103? Would that be the breaking point to then go Caleb over Jayden Daniels?
Yeah. The idea of that poor man being jettisoned to that supporting cast makes my heart hurt. So please, Washington, do the right thing, save him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He'll be thrown in Demario Douglas and KJ Osborne versus Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson there. Yep. Let's talk about Drake May. He has decent odds to go second overall. I think that right now it's kind of the markets have kind of gone back and forth with these two guys over the last month or so. How's May looking with your process, and what should fantasy managers be concerned about with him?
Yeah, so I talked before about risk level, and like that's kind of what I'm trying to identify with the model is like what's the risk level of certain guys, and May is in a riskier zone in the model. He ranks in the 75th percentile, and there are more first-round picks who have flopped in that range than what you see with like the guys above the 80th percentile. So overall, there have been 9 first-round quarterbacks who have ranked between the 65th percentile and the 85th percentile. And again, he's right in the middle of that zone. And those guys are Trey Lance, Dwayne Haskins, Paxton Lynch, Blake Bortles, Justin Herbert, Tim Tebow, Kenny Pickett, Sam Darnold, and Mitch Trubisky. Herbert is the only hit in that entire range. May is down there because he's just a 2-year starter, and as we've seen with guys like Darnold, Trubisky, and Trey Lance in that range, that makes you a lot more volatile. May also didn't have like elite efficiency numbers, both last year. Like I know we talk a lot about what he did last year. He was ACC Player of the Year, but also this year. And it's easy to understand when you look at his circumstances. Like they had a very poorly designed offense, I think, at UNC. So like it's understandable, but like that's why he's more volatile in the eyes of the model. But like I talked before about the guys who have hit despite having very bad profiles in the model, and May possesses a lot of the same traits those guys do. So Josh Allen is the model's biggest whiff, and May is also a big dude who is super athletic, which is the same boxes that Josh Allen checks. He also occasionally dives for a first down despite being 15 yards behind the sticks. Like, that's Josh Allen. I don't know what he's doing. Like, he's like, all right, dude, like, I love the confidence, but, like, you're not going to make it there. So he has some psychopath in his game. And, like, I like that. That's fun. He's a young guy, similar to Josh Allen and Jordan Love. May will be 21.7 years old on day one of the draft. Average first rounder, 22.2 years old. Josh Allen 21.9 and Jordan Love 21.4. So again, there's reason to think his efficiency stats can undersell how good he is. And I think that he has a wider range of outcomes as a result of that. That is both in the negative sense with the higher risk, but also he could be the best quarterback in this draft class because of those physical traits that he has. So the ceiling is there, but the floor is also lower. And that's fine. I'd rather swing for the fences and miss than go with someone who can't do some of the stuff that Drake May can do. But it's worth keeping in mind that players of his mold have busted a bit more often than guys in the Williams and Daniels zone have in the eyes of the model.
Let's talk about another younger prospect in this class, J.J. McCarthy. An elite first name, for the record, J.J. McCarthy. Yeah. He's gaining a ton of steam right now. I mean, I feel like in December and November, people were not even remotely talking about him. And look, I'm not like the biggest college football guy in season. I do a lot of my work, once January hits, but it didn't seem like he was going to be a potential second overall pick in the draft back then. That didn't seem like in his range of outcomes at all, but clearly it's in his range of outcomes now, that this could happen. What do you see about his profile and how legit does he look in comparison to even someone like Drake May?
Yeah, the model loves J.J. McCarthy. It likes him a lot. He's 95th percentile, which ranks second this year behind just Jayden Daniels. He is the youngest guy in this group at 21.3 years old, but he's also very experienced. 10 plus pass attempts in 29 games. Some of those were as a true freshman, even when he was not starting, spelling Cade McNamara. And I think that's important. Like, you hear stories now about how Jim Harbaugh was like, okay, I think that McCarthy's better, but I'll appease the coaching staff who wants McNamara out there and let him play. And they had like this competition when he was a sophomore and they let him both play. And McCarthy won that job pretty emphatically. So he was earning playing time as a true freshman, even if he was not starting. And as a true freshman, he was very, very young. And he is also super efficient. I know we can talk about volume, but like, McCarthy an 89.2 total QBR this year, which ranked third in the nation. And the two guys ahead of him are 2 years older than him and 3 years older than him. So when you adjust for age, he was a monster. And every number, like every contextual number you look at, makes McCarthy even more fun. He had a 13.1 adjusted yards per attempt on 3rd and 6 or longer this year. So obvious passing situations where you can't say, hey, when he was dropping back to pass, people knew they were going to run because they thought they were going to run because it's Michigan. They knew a pass was coming because it was 3rd and long, and he still shredded them. So that number, once McCarthy is drafted, will rank 3rd among first-round picks since 2010, if we assume he does wind up going there, that 3rd and long number. The average... he also faced a really tough schedule. If you look at the average defensive ranking for teams that he faced, it was 38.8 based on Bill Connolly's SP+. The second lowest mark for guys in this class was Jayden Daniels at 46.7, Caleb Williams 64.6, and Drake May 61. So they faced a lot easier schedule than McCarthy did by SP+. McCarthy had a 9.2 AYA against top 50 defenses by SP+. That ranks second in this class behind, again, Daniels, who has a 12.7 because he is a monster. Obviously, this is all just efficiency numbers, not volume, and the volume was low for McCarthy. But then... look at what the Chargers are doing this offseason. They traded away Mike Williams, traded away Keenan Allen. They brought in Gus Edwards. They're going to go ground and pound with Justin Herbert. Are we going to say that Jim Harbaugh now thinks that Justin Herbert sucks because he's going to be a bit more run heavy this year? If we're going to ding McCarthy for that, we got to apply that more broadly too. So I want to be careful not to ding McCarthy too much just because they were run heavy last year, because they were very efficient when they did decide to throw. So from a numbers perspective, his profile is super legit. I had some issues with him from like a deep ball accuracy perspective. Like there were some throws where he just kind of like missed deep. So I'm a little bit lower on him than the model, but like I do like him a lot. And like, let's say hypothetically, there are scenarios where he goes top 4 in the draft. I think that's the point where you consider taking him over the receivers in Superflex rookie drafts. That might be wild because like Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors are amazing. But I think when you look at a guy this age with this good of a statistical profile, with that kind of draft capital, you talked about how well quarterbacks retain value in Superflex. Like that's going to be pretty tempting if that does wind up happening.
What do you think about JJ McCarthy, hypothetical? JJ McCarthy goes to Minnesota at 4. Mm-hmm. They trade up. They get JJ because that's been. I think that's the number 1 landing spot in terms of what
he's minus 105 to go to the Vikings right now.
Yeah. And so you have McCarthy going to Minnesota, and let's just say Drake May goes to Washington, second McCarthy overall. You'd go McCarthy over May.
Well, if he goes second, maybe not. That's it. Let's say if May goes to the Patriots, I would take McCarthy. If May goes second, then it's a tougher situation.
Here's one. JJ McCarthy goes to Minnesota. Jayden Daniels goes to New England.
I'd probably still go Daniels for the rushing.
Yeah, I think so.
Like the situation, like McCarthy is an amazing athlete, but he doesn't run. Like he doesn't want to. And like part of that's because he was hurt towards the back half of last year. Like I've seen a lot of analysts like bring up like McCarthy at the latter half of last year. Like he was hurt. Like his ankle was pretty messed up. And once he got healthy for the college football playoff, like he had a run on 3rd and long. And I think the semifinal game, and like he's like, you're like, oh, Duke can boogie. And like that was kind of like the feature with him when he was younger. The reason he was on the field is because he was a crazy athlete. You're like, I know this has been brought up a lot, but like he's a hockey player. He has like kind of that, like again, like that fun mentality. So I wouldn't over ding him for some non-elite numbers late in the year because he was banged up. And I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah. Bo Nix, Michael Penix, those are 2 other quarterbacks that, some people are into. Penix had a good pro day, it sounds like, at least from an athleticism standpoint. We really can't take 40 times at pro days. We have to take them with a grain of salt, obviously. Is there one of those 2 that you would prefer, both what your model's saying and then maybe what you would prefer from a fantasy perspective?
Yeah, I prefer Nix because he's willing to run. Like, Penix had a good 40 time, but he doesn't run. Like, it just doesn't think he's willing. Like, he had a lot of injuries, so it makes sense. Like, I just think both are pretty low upside. My model likes Nix a lot because he's experienced. He was very efficient his final couple years at Oregon. I just don't like him as much personally. I think this is the biggest deviation between me and the model is being lower on Bo Nix in the model. And a lot of it's because his 8 out with 6.8 yards. Like that's so boring. Like I just don't want to draft boring players. Nobody else in this class is lower than 9.2 for their 8 out. Only 11% of his throws went 20 plus yards downfield. And again, he's almost a full year older than Jayden Daniels, who is not young himself. So I think Nix is a decent shot to go in the first round. I took over 4.5 quarterbacks and even money when that was available. But I just think his upside's pretty low. So like I would go run at wide receivers before I would take Nix and Superflex. Like let's assume he goes 12th to Denver. I don't know if that's realistic, but like if he goes 12th to Denver, I am happily taking the receivers above him in first round dynasty superflex drafts, despite decent draft capital and a decent grading of my model. With Penix, the model's pretty low on him. 66th percentile, doesn't run. He's old. Efficiency was just fine. So I prefer Nix and both these guys to be multiple tiers behind the top 4 guys in this class.
It's a pretty loaded class. I'm going to ask you one more question. Are there any quarterbacks that we haven't talked about that we should keep an eye on?
I would love to say yes, but no. The top 6 quarterbacks by consensus are the top 6 quarterbacks by my model. And like you don't see a lot of non-first round quarterbacks who wind up being viable, whether it be like real world NFL or for fantasy. There's been a lot of talk about Spencer Rattler, 29th percentile by my model. He's not a great athlete, 23.6 years old. The efficiency was not there. Michael Pratt is pretty young for his experience level, but like He had the easiest strength of schedule for any FBS quarterback drafted since 2010, according to SP Plus, if he gets drafted. So, like, that's a pretty big discount there. Jordan Travis was really good this year before his injury. He's 24 years old. So, honestly, no, I really do think that the consensus top 6 are the 6 we should be focusing on, with the heaviest emphasis being on those top 4. Because I think that all 4 of those guys are, like, really good first-round picks. So, like, the depth of this class is awesome. So if you need a quarterback in Superflex Dynasty, which I typically do, I guess less so now because I had a lot of CJ Stroud, but, like, I typically tend to need quarterbacks. It's a good year to need a quarterback.
It is indeed. Jim, thanks so much for hopping on and talking quarterbacks once again. For anyone who's not following Jim and his work, make sure you do so by finding @JimSonis on Twitter. And I'm on Twitter as well, @LateRoundQB. You can check out everything I'm offering, including the prospect guide, which is currently for sale, by heading to lateround.com. Now, I won't have a mailbag episode for you guys this week, but I'll be getting a rewind episode to you on Friday, so you can look forward to that. Otherwise, you'll hear a brand new episode of the podcast next Tuesday, where I dig into the running back position with another special guest. I'll talk to you then.